It was a regular Tuesday evening. I was 37 years old, heading home after a long 12-hour shift at the hospital. My car stopped at a red light, only a few minutes from home. I remember feeling eager to see my husband, Matthew, and our 2 children, Abby, who was 9, and Josh, who had just turned 6. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. The crash was sudden, violent. A drunk driver, later reported to be speeding at nearly 60 miles per hour, slammed into my car's side. In an instant, everything went dark. My body was trapped, unconscious, and bleeding heavily. The next thing I felt was a strange detachment. I was floating. Below, I could see my mangled car, emergency vehicles arriving, and paramedics working furiously to free me. But I felt no fear, no pain. I wasn't in my body. I was watching it, yet strangely calm, as though I was witnessing someone else's ordeal. While hovering above the scene of the accident, I became aware of a warm, radiant light in the distance. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, pulling me gently towards it. The light wasn't blinding or harsh. Instead, it enveloped me like a soft embrace, full of love. I couldn't resist its pull and began moving toward it. The closer I got, the more I felt something extraordinary, a deep, pure love, a love far beyond any human experience. It was an all-encompassing warmth, filling me with peace. As I neared, I felt like I was returning to a place I had known long ago, though I couldn't remember when. Then, standing in the light, I saw him, Jesus. His arms were outstretched, welcoming me with a smile that radiated compassion. The peace I felt in his presence was overwhelming. At 37, I had known many forms of love for my family, friends, and patients. But the love I felt in the presence of Jesus was different. It was infinite and unconditional. He stood before me, and I felt as though he had known me, every part of me, for eternity. Jesus' eyes held a depth of understanding that made me feel completely seen. He knew every flaw, every mistake, yet none of it mattered here. All that existed was love. He embraced me, and the feeling of being wholly accepted and loved washed over me. His voice was gentle yet commanding as he said, "My beloved child, I have so much to show you. Come and see what I have prepared for you." As he spoke, I knew this was more than just a moment. It was an invitation to understand something far greater than myself. Jesus took my hand, and suddenly, we were soaring above landscapes so beautiful they seemed otherworldly. At first, we floated through clouds that shimmered with gold and silver hues. Then, below us, vast mountains rose, their peaks glittering under the same radiant light. Valleys filled with flowers stretched endlessly, their colors brighter than any I had ever seen on earth. Every flower seemed to glow with its own light, and the rivers and waterfalls below us sparkled as though they were made of living crystals. We passed over forests where the trees swayed gently, and the air itself felt alive. Each breath I took was filled with a refreshing purity, unlike anything I had known. There were animals too, but not as I had seen them before. Each one radiated life and peace. The harmony in the landscape was so profound that it felt like the earth perfected, untouched by time or decay. Our journey eventually brought us to the edge of a gleaming city. It was vast, unfathomably large, and laid out in perfect symmetry. I saw walls made of jasper, and each gate, 12 in total, was crafted from a single massive pearl. The streets themselves were paved with gold, but the gold was so pure it looked like glass, reflecting the brilliant light that bathed the city. There was no sun, no moon. Instead, the entire city was lit by the glory of God, filling every corner with radiant warmth. As Jesus led me through the gates, I was overwhelmed by the beauty. Everything here felt perfect. The first thing I noticed was a wide boulevard with a river running down its center, the river of life, as Jesus explained. On either side stood magnificent trees bearing fruit. Jesus told me these were the trees of life, and their leaves were for the healing of the nations. The city seemed endless, yet perfectly designed. Jesus took me further, and soon we stood in front of what he called the Father's house. It was a structure so immense that it stretched beyond what I could see, and the design was both familiar and unlike anything I had known. The walls sparkled with gems, the floors shimmered with light, yet the whole place felt like home. Every detail radiated warmth and welcome. At that moment, I realized that this place wasn't just a physical space. It was alive, just like everything else I had seen. The Father's house seemed to breathe with love and peace, a place prepared for all who trust in him. Jesus led me down a long corridor with countless doors on either side. Each door, he explained, led to a personal dwelling place prepared for believers. When we stopped in front of one particular door, he smiled and said, "This one is yours." As the door opened, I gasped in amazement. The room, more like a suite, was perfectly designed for me. Every detail felt intimate and familiar, yet more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. The colors were soft hues of blue and green, which have always been my favorites. There was a cozy reading nook with a chair by the window and shelves filled with books I had always wanted to read, but never had the time for on earth. A grand piano stood in the corner, polished and gleaming, waiting for me. Next to it, an art studio had been set up with all the materials I needed to paint and draw, something I had always dreamed of doing but never pursued. Looking around, I felt overwhelmed by the love that went into creating this space. It was like a physical manifestation of my heart's deepest desires. Jesus explained that this room wasn't just a reflection of me on earth, but also a place where I would continue to grow in heaven. As I explored the room, something else caught my eye. There was a wall adorned with paintings, scenes from my life. Each painting showed a moment where I had acted in kindness or love towards someone else, even in small, seemingly insignificant ways. One depicted a time I had stayed up late comforting a friend going through a hard time. Another showed a moment at work when I had gone out of my way to help a patient in pain. Jesus explained that these were treasures I had stored up in heaven through my acts of love and service. Every moment of kindness, no matter how small, was recognized and remembered here. Seeing these moments on display filled me with a deep sense of peace and purpose, knowing that my life had meaning beyond what I could have seen on earth. Next to the paintings, there was a shelf of books, journals, actually. Each one contained the prayers I had spoken throughout my life. I was amazed to see how precious these prayers were to God. Jesus told me that not a single word had been forgotten. Every heartfelt conversation with God was treasured and preserved in heaven. After showing me my room, Jesus led me to another part of the Father's house. We walked through grand halls, filled with light, until we reached a vast banquet room. The tables stretched as far as I could see, set with the most exquisite place settings, yet it didn't feel intimidating. Instead, it felt like the perfect place for a family reunion, warm, inviting, and filled with love. Jesus explained that this was where all of God's children would one day gather to celebrate in perfect fellowship. It wasn't just a feast of food, but a feast of love, joy, and togetherness. I could almost hear the laughter and feel the warmth of the community that would one day fill this room. It wasn't about status or wealth, but about the joy of being together in the presence of God, free from pain, division, or suffering. As we continued walking through the city, I started to notice familiar faces. First, it was my grandmother, who had passed away when I was just 17. She looked young and vibrant, glowing with a light I hadn't seen in her during her time on earth. She embraced me, her warmth and love as strong as ever. It was as though no time had passed, and yet we were in a place beyond time. Then, I saw a friend from college who had died in a tragic accident when we were both 20. We hugged, and she told me how excited she was for me to be here, but that it wasn't my time yet. These encounters filled me with an indescribable joy. It was clear that relationships were not lost after death, but transformed and deepened in this place. At the end of our journey through heaven, Jesus turned to me with such love in his eyes. "There is still more for you to do on earth," he said gently. "You must return and share what you've seen here, to give others hope and to remind them of my love." But remember, I am always with you." In that moment, I felt a tug, as though something was pulling me back. I wasn't ready to leave this place of peace and love, but I knew I had to. Jesus embraced me one last time, and then everything went dark. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. I had been in a coma for 3 days, and I was slowly regaining consciousness. Though I was back in the physical world, the memory of what I had experienced in heaven stayed with me, as vivid and real as the day I had seen it. Returning to Earth brought an overwhelming sense of reality, but also a clarity I had never experienced before. Things that once seemed so important, like work stress, minor disagreements, and material concerns, now felt insignificant in the grand scheme of life. Jesus had shown me that the small acts of love and faith were what truly mattered. Even in my hospital bed, I could still see the glimmering images from heaven, the kindnesses I had offered, the prayers spoken in desperation, now appearing to me as treasures in the divine realm. As I lay recovering in the hospital, I felt a strong pull to share my experience. I knew I had been given a gift, not just a glimpse of heaven, but a message for those still on earth. Time felt more precious than ever before, not just in a sense of hours or days, but in how I spent those moments. Every interaction, every opportunity to show love and kindness carried eternal weight. I began thinking about how I could share my story with others, hoping to spark the same hope and urgency in them. One of the most profound changes after my near-death experience was how I viewed relationships. I no longer took the people in my life for granted, whether family, friends, or strangers. I realized that these connections were sacred, and I had a responsibility to nurture them with love and patience. In my marriage, I found a renewed sense of gratitude for my husband. For my children, I wanted to instill in them the importance of living with purpose, knowing that everything they did mattered in a larger, divine context. The concept of eternity, something I had once thought about only in abstract terms, became incredibly real to me. Time, as we know it on earth, seemed fleeting compared to the limitless time of eternity in heaven. This realization made me reconsider how I spent my days. No longer driven by the pressures of career advancement or societal expectations, I started to focus on what would matter in the long run, how I could love, how I could give, and how I could be of service to others. Reintegrating into daily life was challenging, not because of physical recovery, but because of the stark contrast between the peace of heaven and the chaos of earth. I found myself overwhelmed by the trivialities of modern life, emails, traffic, deadlines. Yet, each time I felt this stress, I recalled the warmth and light of the heavenly city. It became my anchor, a reminder to keep my focus on what truly mattered: faith, love, and the eternal connection with God. Even in the mundane, I sought moments to reflect on my purpose and divine calling.